The hanging sheets snapped like gunfire in the hot Montana wind, and Lily Martinez thought for one wild moment that her heart might give out right there among the damp linens. She had been washing clothes for the miners and cowboys of Breckenridge since her husband died 3 years ago, her hands perpetually raw and red from the lye soap and endless scrubbing. The work was honest but brutal, and at 24 years old, Lily sometimes felt ancient beyond her years. The wind coming down from the mountains carried the scent of pine and possibility, but she had long ago stopped believing in second chances. It was late August in 1883, and the gold rush that had built this town was fading like morning mist. The sheets she hung belonged to the Silver Creek Hotel, where traveling merchants and cattlemen stayed when passing through. Lily had washed blood from these sheets more than once, testament to the violence that still punctuated life in this corner of Montana territory. But today the linens were merely dirty with the honest grime of travel, and she worked methodically, pinning each corner with practiced efficiency. She did not hear the horse approach over the wind's roar. She did not see the rider dismount. It was only when a deep voice spoke directly behind her that Lily startled so badly she dropped the wet pillowcase she had been holding. "Madam, I apologize for frightening you," the voice said, rich with genuine concern. "I was wondering if you might have room on that line for one more." Lily turned, her hand pressed against her racing heart, and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the very landscape around them. He was tall, maybe 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. Dust covered his clothes, and a bedroll was slung over his broad shoulder. He held his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "You startled me half to death," Lily said, bending to retrieve the fallen pillowcase. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, fear making her defensive. "I can see that, and I am truly sorry." He took a step back, giving her space. "I have been riding for 3 days straight from Wyoming, and everything I own smells like horse and trail dirt. I saw you working here and thought perhaps you might take on one more customer." Lily straightened, assessing him with the wariness that came naturally to a woman alone. But there was something in his stance, in the careful way he maintained his distance, that eased her initial alarm. "I take in washing," she said slowly, "but I do not usually conduct business in the alley behind the hotel. Of course not." He gestured toward the main street. "Where should I find you? I can pay fairly." "The house at the end of Crawford Street, the one with the blue door. You can leave your items there tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" He looked down at himself with a rueful expression. "Madam, I am not sure the hotel will even let me through the door smelling like this. Would it be possible to wash at least my shirt and spare trousers today?" "I would be willing to pay extra for the inconvenience." Lily hesitated. She had learned to be cautious, especially with strangers, but she also understood desperation when she saw it, and there was nothing threatening in his manner. "I suppose I could manage that. But you will have to wait while I finish hanging these sheets." "I would be happy to help," he said immediately, already reaching for the basket of wet linens at her feet. "That is not necessary." "Maybe not, but these sheets look heavy, and the wind is trying to tear them from your hands." He picked up a damp sheet, shaking it out with surprising competence. "Where do you want this one?" Despite herself, Lily felt a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You have hung laundry before." "I have been on my own for a long time, madam. A man learns to do what needs doing." He stretched up to pin the sheet, his movements efficient and sure. "I am Zachary Malone, by the way. Most people call me Zach, Lily Martinez." She grabbed another sheet, working alongside him. The task went twice as fast with 2 pairs of hands, and Lily found herself relaxing slightly despite her better judgment. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the wind whipping the wet fabric between them. Zach moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body, and Lily caught herself watching the play of muscles beneath his dusty shirt as he reached up to secure the pins. "You are new to Breckenridge," she said, more statement than question. "Just arrived." "I heard there might be work on the ranches north of here. I'm a hand with cattle, and I have some experience breaking horses. There is always work for men willing to do it. The Patterson Ranch is hiring, or so I heard Mrs. Patterson mention when she brought her washing last week." "I appreciate the information." Zach shook out the last sheet and together they pinned it to the line. "There, that should do it." Lily surveyed the rows of white fabric billowing in the wind, then turned to Zach. "You can follow me home. It is not far." Her house was indeed close, a small but tidy structure that had once belonged to her husband's mother. Lily had inherited it along with a mountain of debt and a reputation as the Mexican woman who married above her station, though Thomas had never cared what the gossip said. The blue door was faded but clean, and flowers grew in the window boxes, a small vanity she allowed herself. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and workspace. A large copper washtub dominated one corner, and drying racks stood near the stove. The air smelled of soap and lavender, which Lily added to her rinse water when she could afford it. Zach stood just inside the doorway, looking around with evident appreciation. "You keep a nice home." "Thank you." Lily gestured to a chair. "You can sit if you like, though I will need those clothes if you want them washed today." A faint color rose in Zach's cheeks. "Right, of course. Should I change in the back room there, please?" He emerged a minute later wearing only his union suit and boots, carrying a bundle of clothes that indeed smelled powerfully of horse and sweat and long miles. Lily tried not to notice how the thin cotton clung to his frame, or the way his shoulders tapered to a lean waist. She was a widow, not a nun, but it had been a very long time since she had thought of a man in that way. "I will have these ready by this evening," she said briskly, taking the bundle from him. "You can collect them after supper if that suits you." "It suits me fine, but I hate to leave you with all that work." Zach glanced toward the washtub. "I could stay and help if you would not mind the company." Lily opened her mouth to refuse, then stopped. The truth was that she spent most of her days alone, her only conversation the brief exchanges when customers dropped off or collected their washing. And there was something about Zach Malone that intrigued her, something beyond his handsome face and courteous manner. "I suppose you could pump water while I sort these," she heard herself say. "The pump is out back." They fell into an easy rhythm, Zach hauling buckets while Lily heated water on the stove and began the process of washing his clothes. He asked permission before sitting at her small table, and when she offered him coffee, he accepted with genuine gratitude. "How long have you lived in Breckenridge?" he asked, cradling the tin cup in his large hands. "All my life. I was born here, back when it was just a mining camp with delusions of grandeur." Lily plunged his shirt into the hot water, working the soap through the fabric. "My father worked the mines until they killed him. My mother took in sewing until she followed him 6 years later. I am sorry." The words were simple but sincere. It was a long time ago. Lily scrubbed harder, though the shirt was already coming clean. "I married Thomas Martinez when I was 18. He was a good man, kind and hardworking. He died of pneumonia 3 winters past. That must have been difficult." "It was." Lily rinsed the shirt, wrung it out with practiced twists, and draped it over the drying rack. "But life continues whether we are ready or not. I had debts to pay and no family to fall back on, so I started taking in washing." Zach was quiet for a moment, watching her work. You speak of it matter-of-factly, but I imagine it took considerable courage. Lily looked up, surprised by his perception. Most people saw only the surface of her life, the endless labor and modest circumstances. Few understood what it had cost her to build this small measure of independence. Courage or stubbornness, she said lightly. I am not always sure which. Perhaps they are the same thing, viewed from different angles. She smiled at that, really smiled, and caught him smiling back. The afternoon light slanted through her window, gilding everything in gold, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lily did not feel alone. They talked while she worked, the conversation flowing easily despite their short acquaintance. Zach told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 19, about the years he had spent drifting from place to place, following work and seasons. "Why Montana?" Lily asked, wringing out his trousers. "I heard the land up here is different." "Bigger somehow. I thought maybe it was time to stop drifting to find a place worth staying for." He met her eyes. "So far, Montana is proving to be everything I hoped." There was something in his gaze that made Lily's breath catch, but she looked away, focusing on hanging his clothes. "You should not make judgments based on one afternoon. Sometimes one afternoon is enough to know." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Lily felt her heart beating faster, felt a flutter of something she had thought died with Thomas. But she had learned caution the hard way, and she was not ready to trust this strange, unsettling feeling. "Your clothes will be dry in a few hours," she said, changing the subject deliberately. "You should check into the hotel, get yourself a proper meal." Zach stood, understanding the dismissal for what it was. "Thank you, Mrs. Martinez, for the washing and the conversation both." He placed coins on the table, more than she would have charged. "I will return this evening." After he left, Lily stood in her small kitchen, listening to the silence settle around her once more. The house felt different somehow, as though Zach's presence had shifted something fundamental in its walls. She touched the coins on the table, then looked at the clothes drying by the stove. She was being foolish, she told herself. Zach Malone was just another customer, another drifter passing through on his way to somewhere else. There was no reason to read meaning into kind words and a friendly smile. But when evening came and he returned to collect his clothes, freshly bathed and shaved and looking almost civilized, Lily felt that same flutter in her chest. He thanked her again, then hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Martinez, would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening?" As a thank you for your kindness today. Lily knew she should refuse. She had her reputation to consider, such as it was, and getting involved with a man she barely knew was the height of foolishness. But she heard herself say, "Yes, I would like that." His face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Lily felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Shall I call for you at 6? 6 would be fine." After he left, Lily leaned against the closed door and wondered what she had just agreed to. But beneath the worry and uncertainty, she felt something else. A spark of excitement, small but unmistakable, like the first star appearing in the twilight sky. The next day dragged endlessly. Lily washed and pressed and folded, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind wandered to the evening ahead. She told herself it was just dinner, nothing momentous, but she still found herself changing her dress 3 times before Zach arrived. He appeared promptly at 6, wearing his clean clothes and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked from the meadow outside town. "These are for you," he said, offering them with an endearing awkwardness that made him seem younger than his years. "They are beautiful." "Thank you." Lily arranged them in a jar of water, acutely aware of Zach watching her movements. "I am ready if you are." They walked to the restaurant together, and Lily was conscious of the stares that followed them. Breckenridge was a small town, and people noticed things. By tomorrow, everyone would know that the Martinez widow had been seen having dinner with the new cowboy. The thought should have bothered her more than it did. The restaurant was one of the nicer establishments in town, and Lily felt a small thrill of pleasure when Zach held her chair for her. They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, and when the food came, it was better than anything Lily usually bothered to cook for herself. "Tell me more about your work," Zach said between bites. "It seems like hard labor for one person to manage alone." "It is," Lily admitted. "But I prefer it to the alternatives. Some widows remarry quickly, out of necessity more than choice. Others take positions as servants or companions. I wanted to be my own woman, even if the cost was calloused hands and an aching back. I admire that. Independence is not easy to come by, especially for women." Lily studied him across the table. "You are not like most men I have met." "How so?" "Most men seem threatened by the idea of a woman making her own way. They think we should need them, depend on them for everything." Zach shook his head. "I spent too many years on my own to think less of anyone for wanting the same. Besides, needing someone and choosing someone are different things entirely. The second seems far more valuable to me." His words settled into Lily's heart like seeds finding fertile ground. She had needed Thomas, needed his income and protection and the respectability that came with being a married woman. She had loved him too, but it had been a love born of gratitude and genuine affection rather than passion. What Zach was describing, this idea of choosing from a place of strength rather than weakness, was entirely new to her. They talked long after their plates were cleared, and when Zach finally walked her home, the streets were dark and quiet. At her door, he stopped and turned to face her. "I would like to see you again, Lily, if you would allow it." She should have hesitated, should have considered all the practical reasons why this was unwise. But standing there in the moonlight, looking up into his earnest face, Lily found she did not want to be cautious. "I would like that too." Zach's smile was worth more than gold. He touched his hat in farewell and waited until she was safely inside before walking away. Lily watched him through the window, then pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart race with something that felt dangerously like hope. Over the following weeks, Zach became a fixture in Lily's life. He found work at the Patterson Ranch as she had suggested, breaking horses and helping with the cattle drives that moved herds to winter pasture. But his free time he spent with Lily, helping her haul water and hang laundry, sitting at her kitchen table drinking coffee while she worked. The townspeople noticed, of course. Mrs. Hendricks, who ran the general store, made pointed comments about propriety. Reverend Thomas mentioned from the pulpit the importance of maintaining appearances. But Lily found she cared less than she expected about their opinions. Zach was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. But there was no denying the current that ran between them, the attraction that grew stronger with each passing day. Lily caught herself watching the way his hands moved, the curve of his mouth when he smiled. She thought about him at night when she lay alone in her bed, and her dreams were filled with images that made her blush in the morning light. One Saturday, in late September, Zach appeared at her door with an invitation. "The Patterson Ranch is having a dance tonight. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Lily's first instinct was to refuse. She had not danced since Thomas died, had not allowed herself such frivolities. But Zach was looking at her with such hope that she found herself agreeing. The ranch was ablaze with lanterns when they arrived, and music spilled out into the cool evening air. Lily had worn her best dress, a dark blue cotton that she had sewn herself, and Zach told her she looked beautiful in a way that made her believe him. He was a good dancer, leading her through reels and waltzes with confidence and grace. Lily felt light in his arms, younger than her years, and when he pulled her close during a slow song, she allowed herself to lean into his warmth. "I need to tell you something," Zach said softly, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "What is it?" "I came to Montana looking for land, for a place to settle. Mr. Patterson has offered to sell me a parcel on the north edge of his property. It is not much, maybe 100 acres, but the price is fair and the land is good." Lily's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. "That is wonderful news. You will have your own place." "I will if I take the offer. But before I commit to staying, I need to know if I have a reason beyond land and work." He pulled back slightly, looking down into her face. "Lily, these past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. I know it is too soon, I know I should wait longer, but I am not a patient man when it comes to things that matter. I am falling in love with you." The words hung between them, and Lily felt tears prick her eyes. "Zach, I do not know what to say." "Say you feel something too. Say I am not alone in this." "You are not alone." The admission came out in a whisper. "I have tried not to feel this way, tried to be sensible and cautious, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, everything feels possible again." Zach's face transformed with joy. He spun her around, right there on the dance floor, making her laugh despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. People were staring, but Lily did not care. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt truly alive. They left the dance early, walking back toward town under a sky thick with stars. Zach held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. At her door, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper when she responded with equal passion. "Marry me," he said when they finally broke apart. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not want to waste time when I have already found what I was looking for." Lily's head was spinning. "Zach, we have only known each other a few weeks. I know, but sometimes you just know. From that first day when I saw you fighting with those sheets in the wind, I knew you were someone special, and every moment since has only confirmed it." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I am not asking you to answer tonight. Take time to think about it. But know that I am serious, Lily. I want to build a life here, and I want to build it with you." That night, Lily lay awake, her mind racing. Marriage to Zach would mean giving up her hard-won independence, at least in some ways. It would mean trusting someone again, risking her heart after she had worked so hard to protect it. But it would also mean partnership, companionship, and a love that already felt deeper and more real than anything she had known before. By morning, her decision was made. Zach arrived early, as she had known he would. Lily met him at the door, and she saw the question in his eyes before he could voice it. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy could probably be heard all the way to the Patterson ranch. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around just as he had at the dance, and when he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once. They were married 3 weeks later by Reverend Thomas, who delivered a stern lecture about the sanctity of marriage while performing the ceremony. Lily wore a new dress that Zach had insisted on buying her, white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried a bouquet of the same wildflowers he had brought her that first evening. The Pattersons attended, along with a few of the ranch hands who had become Zach's friends. Mrs. Hendricks came too, though she sniffed disapprovingly throughout the service. Lily did not care. As she stood beside Zach and spoke her vows, she felt only joy. That night in the small house with the blue door, Zach carried her over the threshold and set her gently on her feet. "Hello, Mrs. Malone," he said softly. "Hello, husband." Lily reached up to touch his face, marveling that this was real, that this man was truly hers. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate by turns, a revelation to Lily, who had only known the gentle but unexciting intimacy of her first marriage. Zach worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, and when they finally came together, Lily felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, and Lily traced the scars on Zach's chest, marks from his hard life on the range. "Tell me about these," she said. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "That one is from a bull in Texas that took exception to my presence. That one is from a broken bottle in a bar fight I should have avoided. And this one," he touched a long white line along his ribs, "is from falling off a horse when I was learning to break them. You have lived a hard life. I have lived the life that brought me here to you. I would not change a moment of it." He pulled her closer. "What about you? What are your scars?" Lily thought about the question. "Most of mine do not show on the outside. The loss of my parents, my husband. The judgment of people who thought I was not good enough because of my heritage. The loneliness of these past 3 years." "You will never be lonely again," Zach promised. "I swear it, Lily. Whatever comes, we face it together." It was a promise he kept through the autumn and into the winter that followed. They moved into the small cabin on Zach's new land, spending their first months as a married couple making it into a home. Zach worked hard, building fences and preparing for the cattle he planned to buy in the spring. Lily continued her washing business, though on a smaller scale now that she had other responsibilities. The winter was harsh, with snow piling deep around their cabin. But inside, they kept each other warm, learning the rhythms of married life, discovering how to move together through daily tasks and nightly intimacies. Zach made her laugh with his terrible attempts at cooking. Lily taught him how to darn his own socks. They argued occasionally, quick flare-ups that were resolved with apologies and kisses. By the time spring arrived, Lily knew she was pregnant. She told Zach one evening as they sat by the fire, watching the flames dance in the hearth he had built with his own hands. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Zach went very still, then turned to her with wonder written across his face. "Truly, truly. I am about 3 months along, I think. The baby should come in early autumn." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Lily, I did not think I could be happier than I already was, but you keep proving me wrong." They spent the evening making plans, discussing names and preparing for the changes ahead. Zach became even more protective, insisting that Lily give up her washing business entirely and rest more. She resisted at first, unused to being cared for, but eventually accepted his concern for the gift it was. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Lily's body changed, growing round with new life, and Zach treated her like something precious and breakable. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about his adventures and making promises about the life they would build together. In early September, on a day when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold, Lily's labor began. Zach rode hard to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zach feared he might lose both his wife and child. But Lily was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined. As dawn broke over the mountains, she gave one final push, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the squalling infant on Lily's chest. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Lily looked down at her son, overwhelmed by the surge of love that washed through her. He had dark hair like his father and eyes that would probably settle into the same whiskey brown. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Zach knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears. "He is perfect." "You are perfect." He kissed her forehead, then carefully touched his son's tiny hand, marveling when the baby's fingers curled around his. What should we call him? They had discussed names endlessly, but never quite decided. Now, looking at her husband and son, Lily knew exactly what this child should be called. "Matthew," she said. "After the gospel writer, it means gift of God." "Matthew Malone." Zach tested the name. "It is perfect, just like him, just like you." The weeks that followed were exhausting and exhilarating by turns. Matthew proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and an even stronger will. Lily learned to nurse him, to soothe his cries, to function on precious little sleep. Zach helped wherever he could, walking the floor with their son at night, changing diapers without complaint, bringing Lily water and food while she fed the baby. They were tired and overwhelmed and happier than they had ever been. As autumn deepened and the first snows began to fall, Lily sat by the fire nursing Matthew and watching Zach split wood outside the window. She thought about the path that had brought her here, all the loss and struggle and hard-won survival. She thought about that day behind the hotel when a dusty cowboy had offered to help her hang sheets, and how that simple gesture had changed everything. Life was not perfect. They had little money and many challenges ahead. But they had each other, and they had this beautiful child, and that was more than enough. That winter proved to be even harsher than the one before. The snow started falling in late October and barely let up until March. Zach had prepared well, though, stocking the cabin with firewood and provisions, and they weathered the storms together. Matthew grew and thrived, reaching for his parents' faces, learning to smile and laugh. On the worst days, when the wind howled around the cabin and the cold seemed to seep through every crack, Lily would think about those women in town who had judged her, who had said she was foolish to marry so quickly, to trust a drifter she barely knew. She hoped they never knew what they were missing, this bone-deep contentment that came from building a life with someone you loved. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought a profusion of wildflowers and new beginnings. Zach bought his first cattle, a small herd that he tended with the care of a man who understood what they represented. Each calf born was a step toward financial security, toward the future they were building together. Lily started a garden, planting vegetables and herbs in the rich soil near the cabin. She worked with Matthew strapped to her back, singing to him while she pulled weeds and watered seedlings. The baby grew strong and brown in the sun, his dark hair bleaching to lighter shades, his laugh ringing out across their small piece of Montana territory. By summer, they had fallen into a comfortable routine. Zach worked the land and tended the cattle. Lily managed the house and garden and their son. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Zach had built, watching the sun set behind the mountains while Matthew played at their feet. "Do you ever regret it?" Zach asked one evening. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a cowboy you barely knew." Lily looked at him, this man who had become the center of her world. "Not for a single moment. Do you regret stopping to help a washerwoman hang her sheets? It was the smartest thing I ever did." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I was so nervous that day, trying to think of an excuse to talk to you. I probably would have stood there like an idiot if the wind had not given me an opening. You were very smooth about it, offering to help like that. I was terrified. You were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, fighting with those sheets like you were fighting the whole world. I knew right then that I wanted to be someone you could stop fighting against, someone you could trust to stand beside you instead." Lily felt tears prick her eyes. "You have been that and more. You have given me a life I never dared to dream of." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Matthew had fallen asleep between them, his small body warm and solid. Lily thought about how much had changed in less than 2 years, how a chance encounter had blossomed into this rich, full life. As summer faded into autumn, Lily realized she was pregnant again. This time, the knowledge filled her with joy rather than trepidation. Matthew was walking now, toddling around the cabin and getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a child who knew he was loved. A sibling would be good for him, Lily thought, and she looked forward to holding another baby in her arms. Zach was overjoyed at the news, though he tried to hide his worry about Lily going through labor again. "I am fine," she assured him. Stronger this time, knowing what to expect. The second pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. Lily knew the signs and symptoms, but she was also chasing after an active toddler while her body grew heavy with new life. Zach helped as much as he could, but he was working long hours to build up their herd before winter set in. On a cold November morning, Lily felt the familiar tightening in her belly that signaled the beginning of labor. This time, the process moved faster. By early afternoon, with Mrs. Patterson once again in attendance, Lily delivered a daughter. "She is beautiful," the midwife said, wrapping the baby in clean blankets. "Small but healthy." Lily cradled her daughter, marveling at the tiny features, the shock of dark hair, the small fists that waved in the air. When Zach came in from the barn where he had been nervously wearing a path in the dirt, his face transformed at the sight of his wife and new daughter. "A girl," he breathed, approaching carefully as though afraid he might break the spell. "We have a daughter. We do." Lily smiled up at him, exhausted but radiant. What should we call her? They had chosen a boy's name but had not settled on one for a girl. Zach sat on the edge of the bed, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Sarah," he said finally, "after my mother, if that is all right with you. Sarah Malone." Lily tested the name and found it perfect. "Yes, I like that very much." Matthew, who had been staying with the Pattersons during the birth, came home the next day and regarded his new sister with deep suspicion. "Baby," he said, poking her gently. "Your sister," Lily corrected. "You have to be gentle with her. Help Mama and Papa take care of her." Matthew seemed uncertain about this new responsibility, but over the days that followed, he warmed to his role as big brother. He would bring Sarah his favorite blanket when she cried and pat her head with endearing clumsiness. Watching her children together, Lily felt her heart expand with a love so vast it was almost painful. The winter passed in a blur of night feedings and diaper changes, and the controlled chaos of life with two small children. Zach was patient and helpful, never complaining about the lack of sleep or the constant demands on their time and energy. He seemed to revel in fatherhood, in the weight of Sarah in his arms and Matthew's endless questions about everything he saw. By spring, they had found their rhythm again. Sarah was sleeping better, her small face filling out into round-cheeked beauty. Matthew was talking in full sentences, asking questions that Zach answered with admirable patience. "Papa, why is the sky blue? Papa, where do the birds go at night? Papa, can I ride a horse like you?" "Someday, son," Zach would answer. "When you are a bit bigger." The ranch was prospering in small but meaningful ways. The herd had grown, and Zach was developing a reputation as a skilled cattleman. People came to him for advice, and he was invited to join the local Ranchers Association. Lily watched him grow into his role as a landowner and respected member of the community, and she was proud of how far he had come from the dusty cowboy who had appeared behind the hotel that day. She had grown too, she realized. She was no longer the wary widow protecting herself from further hurt. She had learned to trust again, to love without fear, to believe in tomorrow. One evening in late spring, after the children were asleep, Zach led Lily outside to look at the stars. The night was clear and mild, and the sky was ablaze with light. "You remember what you asked me once?" Zach said, pulling her close. "Whether I regretted stopping to help you with those sheets, I remember. I have been thinking about that question, about how one small decision, one moment of impulse can change everything." He turned to face her, his hands resting on her waist. "I almost did not stop that day. I almost just rode past, thinking it was not my business, that you would not want help from a stranger. But something made me pull up my horse, made me find the courage to speak to you." "I am glad you did," Lily said softly. "So am I. Because every good thing in my life now traces back to that moment. This land, our home, our children, you, all of it started because I offered to help you hang laundry." He laughed. "It seems almost absurd when I say it like that. Love often starts with small things. A gesture, a kindness, a moment when two people see each other clearly for the first time." "I saw you," Zach said seriously. "Even covered in soap and fighting with those sheets, I saw how strong you were, how determined. I wanted to know you, to be part of your life somehow. I would have done anything for that chance." Lily reached up to cup his face. "You offered me more than help with laundry that day. You offered me hope, though I did not recognize it at the time. You showed me that life could still hold surprises, that I did not have to face everything alone." They kissed under the stars, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of promise and fulfillment. When they finally pulled apart, Lily rested her head on Zach's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said, "more than I have words to express. I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." They stood together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, while above them the stars wheeled slowly across the Montana sky. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources and hard winters that killed cattle and tried their spirits. There were illnesses that kept them up at night with worry, and accidents that reminded them how fragile life could be. But there were also moments of pure joy. Matthew's first day of school, proudly carrying the lunch Lily had packed in his tin pail. Sarah's first word, which was Papa, and made Zach weep with happiness. The birth of their third child, another son they named Thomas after Lily's first husband, a gesture that Zach insisted upon to honor the man who had loved and protected her first. The small ranch grew into a larger one. Zach hired hands to help with the work, young cowboys who reminded Lily of the man Zach had been when she first met him, dusty and determined and looking for a place to belong. She fed them at her table and mended their clothes, and some of them stayed for years, becoming part of their extended family. Lily never returned to washing other people's clothes for money, but she kept a line behind the house where she hung her family's laundry. Sometimes on windy days, she would stand there with the sheets snapping around her like sails, and she would think about that August afternoon when everything changed. On their 10th anniversary, Zach presented her with a gift. It was a small painting that he had commissioned from an artist passing through town. The painting showed a woman hanging sheets on a line, her face turned toward the viewer, and a cowboy on horseback in the background, his hat in his hand. "So we never forget," Zach said as Lily stared at the painting through tears. "As if I could ever forget." She set the painting carefully aside and threw her arms around him. "That was the day my real life began. Mine too." They hung the painting in the main room of their house, which had grown over the years to accommodate their expanding family. It became a focal point, a conversation piece, and eventually a family legend that they told their children and later, their grandchildren. Matthew grew into a tall, serious young man who helped his father run the ranch. Sarah inherited her mother's determination and her father's way with horses, becoming a skilled rider who could outwork most of the ranch hands. Thomas, the youngest, was the family peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, destined perhaps for a different life than ranching. As the children grew older and more independent, Lily and Zach found themselves with time alone again. They took long rides into the mountains, just the two of them, reliving the early days of their courtship. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, finding comfort in the familiar weight of each other's presence. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had just ridden past that day?" Zach asked once. Lily considered the question seriously. "I suppose I would have continued as I was, working, surviving, building a solitary life. I might have been content in a way. But I would never have known this." She gestured to encompass everything around them, the ranch and the mountains and the life they had built together. "I would never have known what it feels like to be truly happy." "Neither would I," Zach said. "I was looking for land, for a place to settle. But what I found was so much more than that. I found home. I found purpose. I found you." As the years turned into decades, their love only deepened. They weathered the changes that came with time, the aches and pains and silver hair, with the same partnership that had sustained them from the beginning. They supported each other through the joys and sorrows of watching their children grow up and leave to start families of their own. Matthew married a rancher's daughter and took over the main operation of the ranch, building a house on the western edge of the property. Sarah shocked everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher from back east, but she brought him back to Montana and made him into a passable horseman. Thomas became a lawyer, using his gentle nature and quick mind to help settle disputes without violence, and he practiced in Breckenridge, never straying far from his roots. Grandchildren came, filling the ranch with noise and laughter again. Lily loved having little ones underfoot, though she was grateful she could hand them back to their parents at the end of the day. Zach became the grandfather who taught them to ride and told them wild stories about his cowboy days, some of which were even true. On quiet evenings, when the house was empty of everyone but the two of them, Lily and Zach would sit by the fire and remember. They talked about the early days, the struggles and triumphs, the way their love had grown from a spark into a steady flame that had never dimmed. "I would do it all again," Lily said one night, her hand clasped in Zach's. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear, because it all led here to this life with you." "No regrets?" Zach asked, though he knew the answer. "Not a single one." They celebrated their 30th anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Matthew made a speech about the power of love and commitment. Sarah sang a song she had written about her parents' story. Thomas presented them with a leather-bound book he had made, filled with photographs and memories from their years together. Lily looked around at the faces she loved, at the family that had grown from that chance meeting behind a hotel, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the lonely widow she had been, certain that life held nothing more for her than endless work and solitary survival. How wrong she had been. How gloriously, wonderfully wrong. As the party wound down and the family began to leave, Zach pulled Lily outside to watch the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink and purple, and the mountains stood dark against the horizon. 30 years, Zach said wonderingly. "Where did the time go? Into this," Lily replied, gesturing to the ranch, the family, the life they had built. "Into every moment we chose each other, every challenge we faced together, every joy we shared." Zach wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the day fade into night. Lily leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure against her back, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Zach's joints grew stiff from decades of hard work, and Lily's hands, once so strong and capable, began to tremble with age. But they adapted, finding new ways to help each other, new expressions of the love that had sustained them for so long. They spent more time on the porch, less time riding the range. They welcomed great-grandchildren into the world and mourned the passing of old friends. They watched Breckenridge change and grow, transforming from a rough mining town into a more settled community, while the ranch remained a constant, a piece of the old Montana that refused to disappear entirely. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered again, 3 generations strong. There was talk of planning something grand for the 50th, but Lily and Zach simply smiled and said they would take things one day at a time. That night, lying in bed beside the man she had loved for 4 decades, Lily thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with sheets snapping in the wind and a cowboy brave enough to stop and offer help. Such a small thing, really. Such an ordinary moment. But it had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Zach asked, his voice rough with sleep. "About laundry," Lily said, and laughed at the absurdity of it. Zach understood, as he always did. "Best decision I ever made, offering to help you hang those sheets. Best decision I ever made was letting you." They fell asleep holding hands as they had done nearly every night for 40 years, and their dreams were peaceful. The years rolled on, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings to everyone. Zach's hair went completely white, and his strong back finally began to bend under the weight of years of hard labor. Lily's eyesight dimmed, and her steps grew slower. But their love remained constant, a steady presence that defined their days. Matthew ran the ranch now, with his own children helping. The land prospered under his care, and Zach took quiet pride in seeing his life's work continued by capable hands. Sarah visited often, bringing her city-bred husband and their bookish children who nevertheless loved their time on the ranch. Thomas became a judge, administering justice with the same fairness and compassion that had characterized his childhood. On a warm September afternoon, not long after their 45th anniversary, Zach and Lily sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains rose before them, eternal and unchanging, and the wind carried the scent of autumn. "Do you remember that first dinner?" Lily asked. "When you brought me wildflowers?" "I remember being so nervous I could barely eat," Zach replied. "I was afraid I would say something foolish and ruin my chances with you. You were perfect. You have always been perfect for me." Zach squeezed her hand gently. "We had a good run, did we not? A better life than either of us had any right to expect." "The best," Lily agreed. "No regrets, remember. No regrets." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The light turned everything golden, the same color it had been on that long-ago August day when their lives had intersected behind a hotel in a Montana mining town. Zach's breathing grew shallow, and Lily felt his hand relax in hers. She looked over and saw that his eyes were closed, a peaceful expression on his weathered face. For a moment, panic seized her, but then she felt the slight rise and fall of his chest and relaxed. He was just sleeping, tired from a long life well lived. She sat with him until the stars came out, their hands still clasped, and she thanked God or fate or whatever force had brought them together. She had been given a rare gift, a love that endured, a partnership that sustained, a life that mattered. The next morning, Lily woke to find that Zach had passed peacefully in the night, his heart simply deciding it had beaten long enough. The grief was immense, a physical pain that threatened to overwhelm her. But underneath it was gratitude, deep and abiding, for every moment they had shared. Matthew found his mother on the porch, dry-eyed and calm, holding his father's hand one last time. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking. "He is at peace," Lily said quietly. "We had 45 beautiful years together. So many people never get even one. I was lucky beyond measure." They buried Zach on a hill overlooking the ranch, with the mountains rising behind him and the valley spreading out below. The whole family came, and many of the townspeople too, testament to the respect and affection Zach had earned over the decades. Lily stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and she did not cry. She had no tears left, only memories and love. After the funeral, Lily moved into a small room in Matthew's house. She was too old now to live alone, and her children insisted on caring for her as she had once cared for them. She accepted their help gracefully, understanding that it brought them comfort to provide for her. But every day, weather permitting, Lily walked to the hill where Zach was buried. She would sit beside his grave and talk to him, telling him about the grandchildren's latest accomplishments, the ranch news, the small details of daily life. Sometimes she brought wildflowers, the same kind he had given her on their first date, and she would arrange them carefully at the base of his headstone. The months passed, and Lily grew frailer. She had little interest in food and less in continuing without Zach. The children worried, but they understood. Their parents' love had been the foundation of everything they knew. It made sense that one could not exist long without the other. On a spring morning, almost exactly a year after Zach's death, Lily woke with a strange feeling of anticipation. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the one she had worn to their 40th anniversary party, and asked Matthew to help her to Zach's grave. "Are you feeling all right, Mama?" he asked, concerned by her unusual behavior. "I am feeling wonderful, actually, better than I have in months." She smiled at him, and for a moment he saw a flash of the young woman she had been, vibrant and full of life. "Just help me to the hill, please." Matthew walked with her slowly, supporting her frail weight, and settled her on the bench he had built beside his father's grave. "Do you want me to stay?" "No, thank you, dear. I just want to sit with your father for a while. Come back in an hour or so." Lily sat in the spring sunshine, feeling the warmth on her face, and she talked to Zach. She told him about Sarah's new grandbaby, about Thomas's latest court victory, about Matthew's plans for expanding the herd. She talked about how much she missed him, how empty the world felt without his presence. And then, quietly, she said goodbye to the life they had built together. She closed her eyes, and the sun seemed to grow brighter, warmer. She felt herself drifting, floating, and there was no fear, only a sense of coming home. When Matthew returned an hour later, he found his mother sitting peacefully on the bench, her eyes closed and a slight smile on her face. She had passed as gently as Zach had, simply choosing not to continue without her other half. They buried Lily beside Zach, their graves marked by a single large headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription: "Together in life, together in eternity." The family gathered again, this time with tears but also with stories and laughter, celebrating a love that had endured through decades and would be remembered for generations to come. Years later, when great-grandchildren asked about the painting that still hung in the old ranch house, the one showing a woman hanging sheets and a cowboy on horseback, the family would tell the story. They would talk about how Lily and Zach had met behind a hotel in Breckenridge on a windy August day in 1883. How a simple offer to help hang laundry had blossomed into a love story for the ages. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family history. But the foundation remained the same: the love between a washerwoman and a cowboy, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. On windy days, when the great-great-grandchildren helped hang laundry on the line that still stood behind the old house, they would sometimes pause and think about their ancestors. They would imagine Lily fighting with heavy sheets, determined and proud despite her circumstances. They would picture Zach, dusty from the trail, finding the courage to stop and speak to a beautiful stranger, and they would understand that love, real love, could start with the smallest gesture: a helping hand, a kind word, a moment of connection between two people who were brave enough to take a chance on each other. The legacy of Lily and Zach Malone lived on, not just in the ranch they had built or the family they had created, but in the story itself. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things in life begin with the most ordinary moments. That courage comes in many forms, from the woman determined to make her own way to the man willing to offer help without expecting anything in return. Their story became part of the fabric of Breckenridge, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The house with the blue door, though long since repainted, was still known as the Malone house. The hill where they were buried became a place of pilgrimage for romantics and family members alike. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew down from the mountains, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset. Whether it was memory or imagination or something more, no one could say. But the image persisted. Two souls who had loved so completely in life that not even death could truly separate them. The years turned into decades, and the decades into a century. The ranch endured, weathering economic downturns and changing times. The family grew and scattered, though many remained in Montana, drawn by the same landscape that had captivated Zach when he first arrived. The town of Breckenridge evolved, but certain things remained constant: the mountains, the wind, and the story of the washerwoman and the cowboy. On the 100th anniversary of Lily and Zach's meeting, the family organized a celebration at the ranch. Descendants came from across the country, some bearing the Malone name, others connected through marriage or maternal lines. They gathered on that same hill where Lily and Zach were buried, and they told the story again for a new generation. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, listened with rapt attention. When the story finished, she raised her hand. "Did they really love each other that much?" she asked. Like in fairy tales, her grandmother, Zach and Lily's great-great-granddaughter, smiled. "More than in any fairy tale, sweetheart, because their love was real. They chose each other every day, through good times and hard times, through youth and old age. That is what real love looks like." "I want to love someone like that someday," the little girl said seriously. "Then remember their story. Remember that love starts with kindness and grows through commitment. Remember that the best things in life often begin with someone brave enough to offer help and someone brave enough to accept it." As the sun set that evening, the family stood together on the hill, looking out over the land that Lily and Zach had made their own. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and pine, the same scents that had filled the air on that August day so long ago. And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of one couple's love and labor, every person there understood that some stories never really end. They just continue, changing form but never losing their essential truth. The story of Lily and Zach was like that, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the extraordinary possibilities hidden in ordinary moments. The sheets on the line behind the house snapped in the wind, just as they had 100 years before, a sound like applause or celebration, or the beating of countless hearts. And somewhere, in a place beyond time and memory, a washerwoman and a cowboy smiled, knowing that their love had created something far greater than either of them could have imagined on that first windy afternoon when they stood side by side, hanging laundry and beginning the greatest adventure of their lives.